was looking for opportunities for leadership to try to start the revolution. Because one of the things I learned at Berkeley was I thought the revolution was going to be taught over there. But I realized the faculty were all the Nazis. And so it wasn't happening in the classroom. And the student movement was very fractured, like the left always is. And so I realized, okay, we're not going to be involved in the global revolution, but maybe I can make change back in my hometown of Richmond. And so, you know, my analysis was, well, we're a company town. Chevron runs the town. They handpick people they're going to support for the city council, and they use the police officers union and the firefighters union to be the attack dogs in elections, to attack their enemies and to praise their supporters. And so people never talked about Chevron. It was always about these other side issues. And fast forward to 2002, I had left Richmond. I had gotten out of Richmond because the politics were so poisonous and so racist with the rise of African American power, where African Americans who had been out of power and excluded from power by the white power structure during the history of Richmond, by becoming the majority population, then took over the control of the city hall. Not the economy of the town, but the city hall. And began a systematic process of eliminating anybody who wasn't African American to being a department head and then filtering down. And it was sort of like black revenge against the white power structure, what African Americans had dreamed of forever. Except that the city of Richmond has never had a stable single population. It's always been a community in flux, always been a community with changing demographics. So prior to World War II, which is when Richmond blew up and became the city it is today, it was only 24,000 people. But it was made up of Germans and Italians and Japanese and Croatians and Serbians and Midwestern white folks, and a very small African American population. There were Portuguese. Portuguese arrived in West Contra County in 1840. So they've been there ever since then. So we've always had this tremendous diversity over there, but it's always been one in flux. So prior to World War II, Italians were the single largest population of foreign-born people. Now you wouldn't even think there were ever Italians over there, except for the Galileo Club. So you go through that period where all these Midwesterners and Southerners were brought in, and Richmond went from 24,000 people to 110,000 people in 18 months. And so the city transformed rapidly and massively after that. So the urban core was very dense, and then you start getting what was considered suburban housing in those days, which are the older homes built in the 40s with a nice little yard. And so people, African Americans in particular, continued to come out of the South because Jim Crow was reality, and even got hotter in the 1950s and 1960s. So African American folks continue to migrate to the Bay Area, and most African American folks in Richmond come from Louisiana, East Texas, some from Oklahoma, and some from Arkansas, a few from Mississippi. We don't get the Georgia, Carolina, Virginia migration that went up the East Coast and places like that. So, and then the Chicano population, the Mexicano, Latino population, of course, you know, there were always Mexicans around, and places like North Richmond, which is, now if you ask anybody who even heard of North Richmond, they'd probably say, oh yeah, black ghetto, a lot of murders, and it's actually, originally, until World War II, it was Italian, Portuguese, and Mexican. Then it became a segregated housing destination for African Americans during World War II. And so the Latinos came originally from the refugees, like my grandparents, to Richmond, from northwest Mexico and from western Mexico. Then in World War II and afterwards, people came from New Mexico and Texas. So they were Americans already, even though they were Mexicans, and they had citizenship. So they demanded the right to vote and participate politically, very different than the Mexican immigrant population from Mexico. And they started groups like LULAC and you know, the civil rights types of organizations. Well, by the 1960s, all the contradictions in society, you know, exploded. Richmond had the second black race riot on the West Coast after Watts. Everybody knows about, I'm presuming everybody knows what. How many of you have heard about the Watts race riot? Okay, educated crowd. So that was August of 1965. Richmond was April of 1966, and it was response to a fight at Richmond High. And in the end, martial law was declared. They occupied the city with the National Guard. They brought in every police department from San Leandro to Vallejo and did house-by-house searches in North Richmond for weapons because people were sniping at the cops. The police chief ordered shoot to kill on sight anybody suspected of looting between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. and that went on for 3 days. So that's when I was in 6th grade. And one of the features of that was Chevron only hired white people. In those days it was called Standard Oil of California. North Richmond was wide open. By then it had become an African American community predominantly, and you could gamble over there. There were brothels over there. There was, you know, the nightclubs and alcohol. So the white guys would stop in there on their way home to the suburbs. Well, this day they got met by all these African American kids with rocks and bottles and bricks attacking their cars. That freaked the hell out of everybody. That began the white divestment out of Richmond that built the Hilltop Mall and devastated the downtown McDonald Avenue. When I was a kid, that was the mall. And you would start out down on 1st Street and you'd walk all the way up to the what is now the BART station, which was 16th Street, and then you walk back down the other side. At one time, Richmond had 12 movie theaters along McDonald Avenue. This before multiplexes. And there were restaurants, there was workout clubs, health clubs, all these types of things, all downtown Richmond. It all got abandoned and sent up the Hilltop. Well, what's going on with Chevron? Hey, Greg.
Howdy.
This is my colleague Greg Karras from CBE, our senior scientist. And so, where did Chevron fit into all this? Well, they controlled the city and made sure that nobody paid attention to what they were doing during all this period of time. So by the time the 1980s rolls around and crack and guns hit our community, there was this nascent consciousness raising that emerged in urban centers like Richmond as part of the broader environmental consciousness that was being developed, really as an outgrowth of the hippie movement. And so within that, there were folks in the African American community start to wise up and realize, wait a second, you know, we live in these neighborhoods right next to the refinery, and we're the first people to get hit when there's problems at the refinery. And there were environmentalist folks who were saying, well, look, you know, why is it happening to low-income communities of color? That's called environmental injustice. And one of our old friends, Dr. Henry Clark, is one of the first people in our community to really articulate that as being a class issue and a race issue. And simply by articulating that, it made people in the community think. And once they started realizing, well, why did that happen to us? How did that happen to us? Then you begin to realize, we began to realize, it's through control of the political system and the economic system, and through co-optation of people in the community to buy their complicity and or their silence. And so that's really no different than the way they run third world countries. So I began to realize, wait a minute, Richmond is being run like a third world country within the United States. All the mechanisms of domination are exactly the same. And the divide and conquer strategies are exactly the same. So one of the things that has changed, like I said, the demographics consistently change, is that here in the Mission in the 1990s, because of the dot-com boom, there was tremendous gentrification pressures pushing out low-income Latino families out of the Mission. What they did was they got on BART and they moved to Richmond and Sao Paulo, which has the cheapest, or the lowest median income housing prices in the Bay Area. And they ended up riding BART. During the 1990s and early 2000s, I worked over here for the Trauma Foundation at San Francisco General Hospital. That's where I did my gun control work. And I watched the demographics change as I commuted on BART. And so, you know, the people tell their own story, right? The people's migration. So Richmond also was, starting in the late 1970s, became the recipient of some of the modern Mexicano migration, but with this pressure from the folks coming in from the Mission, all of a sudden that diversified it. So it wasn't, is your family from Mexico, or is your family from New Mexico, or is your family from Texas? It's now, oh, we have Guatemaltecos, we have Salvadoreños, we have Peruanos, you know, we have Nicaragüenses, you know, so it's diversified the internal Latino community. And Latinos, according to the last census, are now the plurality group in Richmond. So the demographics continue to shift.
And don't forget the Vietnam War.
Oh yeah, well, and then that brings our friends APEN. So, of course, the Vietnam War had a very devastating effect on Southeast Asia. One of the impacts was the CIA got folks in Laos, tribal leaders, to cooperate with them in the war effort, and so when they lost, these people went into refugee camps in Thailand, and ultimately they got brought over here to the United States under refugee programs, and Richmond became one of the destination spots. And so we became a destination, well, Sao Paulo became a destination for Vietnamese folks, and Richmond and North Richmond became a destination for Laotian folks. Now within the Laotian nationality, there are ethnic divisions. There's the Mien, which is the largest group in Richmond, and then you have Hmong, who never came to Richmond. They went to places like Fresno and Minnesota. And then you also have Khmu, which are more like Southern, and they're more like Cambodians, and they're also present in Richmond. And then you have the Lao, Lowland Lao, Highland Lao. And out of that, and their experience there, evolved an organization, well, statewide, called the Asian Pacific Environmental
These are
Network.
people who may have grown up and spent a whole bunch of their life in a refugee camp in Thailand, drawing pictures of people falling on their village when they were kids, and then they come here and start families.
Mm-hmm. And because they were put in public housing projects, frequently they became the victims of crime. And one of the reactions is you defend yourself. And that led to gang culture, which is, you know, was a very strong problem in their community. But you also had the fact that the older folks came from a non-literate culture. You know, there was no written language for the Mien people, strictly oral. And so those social adjustments led to, you know, they defy the myth of the model minority for Asians, because they are the people who don't fit into that picture and have struggled. So they are in the fence line communities along with African American folks, along with the Latino folks. And so they created the Laotian Organizing Project, which has been, along with, of course, CBE, one of our closest partners in this environmental justice struggle in Richmond, and continue to be to this day. So where are we at today? Well, August 6, 2012 was the big Chevron explosion at the refinery. Since then, Well, one of the most important things that happened was the U.S. Chemical Safety Board came to town. They are presidential appointees. They are independent, along with the National Transportation Safety Board, the only two independent investigatory agencies of a similar ilk in the federal government. They have no regulatory authority, which kind of gives them wide-ranging investigatory authority. And what they basically, with the chair, Rafael Erraza More, basically came out and said, the story of this fire is not about a pipe that burst. It's about corporate irresponsibility. That it was management culture that led to them basically failing to listen to their own engineers to replace pipes that were corroding, known to be corroded, identified as corroded, identified as a risk by their own people, because they would have had to slow down production and therefore diminish profits. So when that pipe did fail, if you haven't gone to the Chemical Safety Board website and seen their video recreation, please do that. It's csb.gov, right? Yeah. And put in Richmond refinery. You'll see a video recreation, and 20 workers almost were incinerated. They escaped only by feeling their way out of a vapor cloud that was completely enveloping them. And the video also shows that one of the Chevron firefighters was in the cab of the truck when that vapor cloud finally ignited and was completely enveloped in flames. He thought everybody else was dead. He opened up the door and ran through the fire to escape it. It sent 15,000 people to the hospital.
That actually had the fire protective gear on.
Yeah, he was completely surrounded in fire protective gear. That's how he came through the fire.
He ran through the fire.
Yeah, with the mask, the helmet, everything. 15,000 people reported at the hospital over the next week or so. And so ever since then, the battle has really taken on many, many venues, which...
Before we go there,
sure.
if I may, some of the drama here has to do, to really understand the drama, at least the way I feel it, is somebody's in the middle of, I'm a scientist with CBE. I've been working with the community in Richmond for 30 years now. And short story, I grew up in a place where my dad would come home. He lost colleagues in industrial accidents, and they fired him. We had to eat the fish we could catch for a while. As a scientist, I actually do these two weird things. On the one hand, I publish in prestigious peer-reviewed journals because CBE, not because I'm smart, because CBE does independent science, and the oil industry's got its hooks in universities and government, and a lot of good science that needs to get done doesn't get done unless we do it. On the other hand, truth is that I get most of my best ideas and analysis from our members who participate in the research. And if you think about it, you'll know why. There's nobody who's more focused and practical than somebody who's protecting their kids from something like this. And so that's me. But here's what's positive and good, and what I think could win, and what makes it dramatic, what Chevron's doing now. The community was getting organized over more than a decade. CBE was a big part of that. So is the Laotian Organizing Project, the APAN, West County Toxics Coalition, people like Henry Clark. And I guess probably the first thing we did was we broke down the black-brown barriers. And our members, although they sometimes need translation to communicate with each other, are Latino and African American and Southeast Asian immigrant, and there's some low and middle class white people there too. We really trust each other and get along. They're not going to divide us again the way they used to. Then we started to get really serious about what to do about this. Chevron proposed, you probably know about dirty oil. There's conventional crude oil, you've seen it in oil spill pictures. And then there's this stuff that's actually fundamentally different. It takes a lot more energy to make gasoline out of it. It's a lot more contaminated. Some examples of how much more it pollutes. This has been proven by our work. 10 times more toxic selenium discharged to the bay per barrel of oil refined, in some cases. As much as 5,000 times more mercury in each barrel of oil, in other cases. For greenhouse gas emissions, and this is the industry that's the biggest industrial greenhouse gas emitter in the state. And
yeah,
in fact, Chevron's the biggest single.
Richmond refinery is single largest greenhouse gas emitter in the state.
Yeah, and this industry as a whole, among sectors, is too. 2 to 3 times more greenhouse gases per gallon of gasoline made from tar sands like and real heavy crude. And of course that's from burning more fuel for energy, so all the combustion products, all your toxic VOCs, and hydrogen, sulfide, sulfur dioxide, there's hundreds of pollutants. And this is in a community that's up where people are already sick from the routine emissions and the incidents. And there's more incidents. So we got together and we challenged Chevron in about 5 years ago. This
2008.
This came to a head 2008 through 2010. But anyway, in the middle of last decade, Chevron proposed to retool the refinery to refine really nasty, dirty, fundamentally different kinds of oil. And they lied about it. They have to retool. It's just that this oil is so different that you can't run it without changing the refinery. Then once you invest those billions of dollars, it's locked in for another generation. So, we were staring at being massively further poisoned for a very long time. So we fought them. It was a David and Goliath battle. And we ended up winning, in large part because the company lied straight on down the line. We ended up getting, on appeal, we got a decision, a unanimous decision from 3 Republican judges saying so. And saying, you can't do this project until you tell the truth about it, and then it has to go through public review and permitting again. Around the same time, the community getting organized, of course, does all the things that they need for themselves, and Andrés sort of referred to this before. For the first time in the history of this city, the community organized and won an election. They got a majority. So in 2010, for the first time in the history of Richmond, Chevron did not own the majority of the city council. Chevron had started building its project that was illegal before the court injunction told them to stop. Mm-hmm. They say that they lost maybe $700 million on that gamble. And then they lost power in the city that, why El Segundo has the name it does? And Chevron was Standard Oil. Standard Oil had 2 refineries in California. The second one was El Segundo, down there. Guess what this one was? Standard Oil, California #1. Mm-hmm. So that's where it comes from. They refinery in Northern California, I think the biggest in the state, depending on how you measure it. It's the one Chevron's headquarters territory. Their headquarters is in the Bay Area too. So they decided to fight to contest for power. They've been dumping money into elections, stuff like that.
In the last 2 elections in 2010 and in 2012, Chevron alone spent over $1 million in the Richmond City Council race.
Yeah.
Think about that per capita.
They captured one of the unions, not the one that represents the refinery operators who are on the front lines and get killed and poisoned like we do and are on our side, the steel workers, but one of the other unions that does maintenance works or builds stuff at refineries. They used them to do really divisive politics in Sacramento, essentially. I can't prove it, but basically they're laundering money. The oil industry gets these gigantic multi-billion-dollar tax giveaways and sometimes direct kickbacks from the state and federal government. They don't pay severance tax. It's the only major oil producing state in the country where there isn't one. Chevron's the major oil.
And severance tax means that the oil that comes out of the ground of the state is taxed for the benefit of the people of the state. That's how Huey Long became the powerhouse of Louisiana. California's the only state that doesn't receive a tax for oil.
It's the only major oil producing state. It's the third or fourth biggest in the country. It's the only major one that doesn't have one. So we're in a situation where there's a severance tax on oil in Iraq. We're closing schools and we don't have one. You think Chevron's powerful in this state? So I expect that, you know, if we really knew the hearts and minds of the board and leadership of Chevron, that a lot of this would be just you know, an emotional, psychological reaction to being challenged by community power. But they have been, and they're reacting very strongly, even if it's only for their own economic or profit-based interests. There's a huge fight going on in Richmond. It's very tough right now. People, communities, families are being divided by the tactics. And we're at the heat of it right now. And one of the things that we were saying as we fought this project so far successfully, although we fought it to a holding action, there's still back. One of the things that we kept saying is it's not just the routine everyday emissions. This also makes refineries less safe. It makes them blow up more. It corrodes them. We've since learned that the steelworkers union, the refinery operators, the people who every week, pretty much, somewhere in the country, one or more of them die in an industrial accident. Although they don't call them accidents because they're not. They're foreseeable and preventable. They had been saying the same thing. They'd been filing formal complaints with California Occupational Safety and Health. Those were getting buried and denied. And we found out, we started working with them more closely just before the fire, and we found out that we were saying the same things separately and getting ignored, so we started to get organized and work together, and now we're in formal coalition. And then the fire happens, and guess what? It was Chevron switching. They already were switching to much higher sulfur crude at high temperatures. That's very corrosive in a very dangerous way. It corroded a whole bunch of pipes throughout the refinery. This one happened to be the one that went first, and then this one for 10 years, while we were saying fix it from the outside, and Chevron was saying they fixed the pipes in the same unit, the crude unit. They were lying about it. The workers for 10 years repeatedly had been saying, fix this pipe, at least inspect it, and the corporation refused to. Just kept it running. Every day that they are at full production, they take in about, well, let me say every 4 days, they take in about $1 million of gross margin selling the product. That's the margin above the crude cost. And so for every day that might be $250,000 of lost profit opportunity if they shut down for 1 day to fix something. And that's the way this industry works. So it's Chevron's tactics for now have actually driven the workers, the real workers, the ones who really work in the refinery, and the community closer together, and we're fighting side by side. While the company corporate office has turned our attention on us and our little community in much the same way, you might know, it's turned its attention on the people who've been fighting for justice for Ecuador over the oil spills. It's starting here now, and it's part of a bigger thing. California is by far the biggest refining center west of the Rockies. And the U.S. is by far the biggest refining country in the world, so California is a huge world refining center. California's traditional current supply of crude from the Central Valley, Kern County in Alaska, running out fast. This industry is going to have to find a new source of crude oil. Nobody can help that because they can't. We won't be able to close them down fast enough. So this community doesn't want to. We need to close up our economy before we do. We don't want to close them tomorrow. But they won't close tomorrow, and they're going to find a different source of crude. They get it from all over the world. They have lots of choices. Are they going to go for the cheap, dirty stuff? Yeah, if they can get away with it. Chevron's leading that as the biggest refining company in the state and in the Bay Area. They're leading that industry charge, but it's industry-wide in this state. And the question on the table for everybody is, are we going to kill our climate and our future as we know it? Or are we going to stop the oil industry in California? The same one that we haven't even been able to get to pay a severance tax while schools are closing. Are we going to be able to stop them from destroying our climate by going to the bottom of the barrel oil when they don't need to, just for an extra buck? And that battle is being fought in Richmond on everyone's behalf. That's the drama of this.
And it gets played out, as Greg alluded to, in Sacramento, this divide and conquer strategy. There's this one bill, AB 26, that would essentially take the building trades unions, who are in bed with industry, and, as he was alluding to, probably laundering oil industry money to fight to take away the jobs from the steel workers and replace them with their workers.
Yeah, well, let me be specific.
And would say routine maintenance, which is the turnaround of what they call turnarounds, where they strip out the old pipes and put in new ones, which is routine maintenance for the refineries. It would declare those public works projects and pay the refineries out of the greenhouse gas emission fund that was created after AB 32. So essentially, declaring those public works and subsidizing the work and replacing the existing workers with these itinerant workers.
Yeah, so California, yeah.
Well, question. Do you think it is possible to shut down big oil in this country the way the Germans have shut down their atomic energy plants? Do you know the Germans have shut down half their atomic energy plants, and the Japanese have shut all of theirs down?
Yeah, and we just shut down Santa Monica.
Right.
Oil's real different from electricity, so the timing is the difference in the answer. If you're saying, are we going to do it in a couple of generations, can we? Yeah, we have to, and it's definitely possible.
How about 5 years?
No.
It's going to happen in 5 years.
Yeah, that's highly unlikely, and that's not something that our organizations are pushing for, and I'll tell you why. Well, it's unlikely because even if you and I were running everything, we were the government, the scale of the energy infrastructure that's necessary to keep the economy going without everybody starving and having mass chaos and real immediate pain, the scale of that energy change is unlikely to be doable in less than 20 years, no matter how much political power and money we could devote to it. And that's not my conclusion, that's the conclusion of the mainstream science. What you may not know is that while the news media talks about how there's a scientific consensus about how climate change is caused by humans, and it's serious, in the scientific community, that's yesterday's news. What we've been doing for the last 10 years is working on what's the solution and how do we get there. And there is a scientific consensus from 10 years of work on this. It's going to take a generation if we start now. So that's the practical side. On the community side, think about what would happen if we shut down everything that uses petroleum fuels right now. How many people would starve? How many people would not have their respirators work? How much of our food, and I'm going to tell you it's most of it, is transported thousands of miles before we even get to our table. And in a place like Richmond, where the economic problems are so severe that that's actually a big part of the health problem along with pollution, there's a plurality of our community and a total consensus among the leadership that if it were possible, we would not want that to happen. Because it would kill us to do it too quickly, frankly. And like I said, we are practical about this. We're not
Plus property taxes pay for about 25% of the operating budget of the city. Okay, let's see. I think she had her hand up first. Back here. Yes, you. I saw your hand first, and then we'll go to your hand there.
I had so many questions. Who are your friends in the legislature, if any?
Don't know yet.
what can you tell us about about our congressional delegation and our state and the Bay Area legislature?
I think it's fair to say that George Miller is a friend of workers and communities on these refinery issues, has been for many years. How much he can do in the Congress that we have in Washington now is a different question.
Yeah.
Part of what's dramatic about this and also sad is that I want to go back to what Andrés was saying. Let's not talk about speculation about money laundering. Here's what's actually factual. The bill that Chevron is running, and they're having this captured union, sort of a company union, oil industry union really, fronting for them. This bill would literally give oil companies billions of dollars a year in additional subsidies just to do what they pay for now to keep their plants in repair and running to the extent they do. So they get billions. The union that's fronting for them the bill would also give that union's workers jobs that aren't in the union's expertise. They're actually refinery operator jobs, and take them away from the union that's fighting the industry. And that would, those jobs, wages on those jobs would be many millions per year, right? Following this money. This particular union that's captured is not a real union like you might think of them. It's a hiring hall. It's almost like a trade association. They go out and find the work. It's not like you get hired by Chevron and then you join the union to protect yourself. You have to join this trade association or you don't get a job at all. And you have to pay big dues. So the additional workers that get those jobs, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of dues go to the union. This union is among the top 10 political contributors to virtually every Democrat in Costa County.
Yeah.
So you can call that money laundering, you can call it whatever you want, but those are the facts. And like I say about in state legislature, is there a liberal Democrat who's really going to be our friend? We don't know yet. That battle is being fought right now too.
Our assembly member from Richmond, who used to be Berkeley City Councilwoman, Nancy Skinner, voted for the bill in Mules, voted for the bill in the Environmental Committee, and then voted for the bill on the Assembly floor. So AB 26 has already passed the Assembly, is now passed on the Senate side. And even the author is Susan Bonilla, who was a former Concord City Councilwoman, and 4 of the 5 refineries in Northern California are in her district. Even her political rival, Joan Buchanan, they're going to be battling out to go up to the state Senate in Mark DeSaulniers' seat. Even she voted for the bill because of the building trades money. And so the building trades has donated literally, hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Democratic leadership. And so if the vote went down pretty much straight party line, Democrats all voting for it.
And one of the things that's really sad is if you actually go online and look at the reported contributions from building trades unions to these, it's actually not that much money. It's crumbs in a sense.
Like $25,000 per candidate.
Yeah. So it's a very, to me, the whole picture is a very dramatic and poignant situation.
I think she had her hand up next.
Realize that the reason why the oil industry is so profitable for the people at the top is that very little of the money stays in the community or even in the jobs. In California and statewide, the oil industry, oil refining in particular, creates the least jobs per dollar of revenue, of gross revenue. And bus driving, public transit, 40 times more jobs for every $1 million of gross revenue. So for the same amount of economic activity, you can have 40 times more or 40 times less jobs. Somewhere in between there, about 10, 20 times more, are all of the kinds of businesses that would build the green economy. And in our community, and I think many others like ours, there's a huge opportunity, if we could get the investment, to solarize and make our buildings more efficient. Put solar panels on roofs, well, that works when when you're also insulating your roof and your windows so that you get the efficiency, which is the cost savings part of it. And then it's cheaper and competitive. And that could be literally thousands of jobs in Richmond, a community of about 100,000 people.
Right.
So at the refinery, they say they're using the best available pollution control technology. You can hear them and see them say this and go on their website, you can see it. How long have solar panels been around? This refinery uses more electricity than the rest of Richmond combined. How many solar panels do you think they use? Yeah, so we want to see them partially solarize the refinery, get us jobs while they're reducing their emissions, and then we want to be building the alternative so that we have a pathway where our kids get trained and unemployed people in Richmond get trained, and there's a job at the end of that path.
Have you heard of Senate Bill AB 19 by Palm in Canada? It's to solarize the whole state.
Yeah,
It's the feed-in tariff for the whole state.
Right, I have.
And Los Angeles just passed a feed-in tariff. Germany passed one that created 400,000 jobs, $4 billion in cash flow. And last month, Germany achieved 50% solar energy for the whole country.
They're not at 50% solar.
50% during the month of May.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And it's during the summer.
During the day.
When the sun shines.
It's a common
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, if you ask me, is this technically doable and can it be done? Absolutely. The science proves that. It's just telling us that to get to the point where we actually protect our climate, we're talking more than an 80% reduction in emissions from all of the oil industry and all of the electricity. To get there, the pathways, and these are people, some of them are friends of mine, and like I say, it's a scientific consensus. To do that without having really, really massive social and human disruption is going to take a generation. That's the caveat. And I don't like to believe that, but the thing is,
Germany did it in 1 year.
Yeah.
And Japan did it
No,
in
but
1
that's
year.
one country.
Japan
Then you
did it
have
because they had a
China.
crisis.
And
no,
you have
actually,
the United States.
Japan burned a hell of a lot more oil while their nuclear plants were shut down.
Mhm.
That's the fact.
Well, it's
Yeah.
solarized.
And we burned more natural gas here while San Onofre was shut down. So if you're talking about actually transitioning to a green economy, this is actually, I hope you're right, of course, and in my heart and soul, I hope we can do it faster. But this is what I meant when I introduced myself about how in a community like Richmond, and this is actually true in other communities on the shallow smokestacks where I've worked, where people are, half the kids are in the classroom have asthma inhalers, and people are rushing their kids to the emergency room with asthma attacks at night, and literally 50% asthma rates in some of these fence line communities and kids. It's you kind of have to see it to believe it. But this is what actually makes CBE science so strong, is that we are led by our community, and people, when they're in that kind of situation, become very practical. And so we don't fight for things that we can't win, that won't work. What we are doing, and this you probably know about community choice aggregation. What it means is, instead of PG&E having all the control, they still run the power lines, but your community, and this is starting to happen in San Francisco now too, your community gets to decide where you buy your power. You can buy it from a green power producer instead of a fossil power plant. You can build your own. You can use that stream of money to finance your own local solar and alternative energy development. Well, Marin County happens to be the very first place in California, the first place ever to use that relatively new state law that allows that to happen. And Richmond has just joined Marin County, so we're starting to roll that out in Richmond. It'll be interesting because the demographics are different, but Richmond's about 40% of the total Marin plus Richmond service area. So it's going to have some power in this relationship, and Richmond's interest, of course, is to use this as another tool to build the good alternative so that we actually have an alternative and can say goodbye to Chevron. That's what we're moving towards.
And I think it's hard to compare us to, say, Germany or Japan, just because we're monumentally, like, we're so much bigger than both of those countries combined. I mean, California alone is bigger than Germany, right?
Yeah. We have a lot bigger dependency on gas too
Exactly.
than anywhere in the world.
Yeah, there's a couple of statistics that blew my mind. One of them is gasoline use per capita, and it's kind of what you think it would be in one way. You know, in Houston, where they don't even have sidewalks, it's higher. In New York City, where they have great public transit, it's dense. It's the lowest of the cities in the country. But here's what blew my mind is how different that is. And then you go to other countries, and while there's this huge difference within the U.S., the best in the U.S. is really, really bad compared to the worst in Europe. And the best in Europe is really, really bad compared to Tokyo. It turns out that we waste energy the way we waste water, 200 gallons per day on average per household. How many do you use when you're backpacking in a day? 4 liters, right? So we actually are set up to be very wasteful. We also are set up with, except for a few islands of relative goodness like San Francisco, we don't have public transit to speak of, and we're set up where everybody has to drive a long way if they can get a job to work. And this has been hardwired in through gazillions of dollars of government investment in infrastructure over generations, right? Mm-hmm. So the difference is, there's a wonderful diversity out there in the world. In terms of energy and pollution, we're on the wrong side of it.
I have a couple questions, just 2 questions really. How effective has Bay Area Air Quality District been in its role with Richmond? Effective at all?
Well, Greg is by far more knowledgeable, but one thing that my introduction to all this, because I started working, even though lifelong resident, aware of all these issues, I only started working for CBE a week before the fire. Mm-hmm. And when the fire was burning, I watched the press conference where the spokesperson for the Air District was standing right next to the Chevron spokesperson. And the Chevron spokesperson was saying, this is a result of the environmentalists and the community not letting us upgrade our refinery. And then the Air District spokesperson said, there are no detectable emissions, blah, blah, blah. And the reality that we found out later was the monitoring systems, the units that they do have, and I think there were only 3 at that time that were detecting this stuff, only comes on, they come on for 24 hours, 1 day every 6 days. And they were not even on at the time of the fire. And they can only detect the ambient emissions, not the particulate matter that was really the residual fallout from the fire.
Yeah, so
and so they're inefficient.
Yeah,
It sounds like they're in bed with Chevron.
When my dad finally got a job again, he got a job sort of on the ground floor of when the Air Resources Board started. And his job was actually in doing air monitoring, setting up the stations and then supervising people. I did that for a little while when I was in college. So I remember how it started. And it was a fight every inch of the way. There's, we talked a little just now about how corporations corrupt and take power from legislatures. And that's where people watch more, where people watch less, where there's more secrecy in government agencies. You might imagine it's worse. And there's a diversity of government agencies. Some are completely captured, some are partially captured. What I'd say about the Air District that sort of applies to Andres' point everywhere is that they said there was no problem with our air while 15,000 of us were going to the hospital. choking and dry heaving. Obviously that was a lie, but the more specific technical lie was that they didn't measure to find out. And they knew that they weren't measuring to find out because they chose not to spend that money under political pressure. The fact is that the Air Resources Board and a lot of good people in the agencies fought for a generation to get the monitoring system that we have. They got half of the baby. What they got was a monitoring system that measures the ambient region-wide average air quality. What they didn't get was the rest of it. Now, think about what that means. If you're going to accurately measure the region-wide average, you have to make sure that you're not putting your monitoring stations in places that are too clean or what? Too dirty. So, by design, they excluded communities like Richmond, where people live in the shadow of the smokestacks and the shadow of Chevron. So, by design, our community's not measured, and they never came back in a generation since they set up this first part of it. They've never come back and fixed it, and now they don't want to admit they haven't done it. So that's the institution. That's not just an individual. That's institutional. Now, the individuals in there now, I'll be really honest, I know them well. I talk to them. A lot of them talk to me. We talked with the chairman yesterday. He was most interested in whether he had the votes for what he wanted to do, which was mildly good. The executive officer is most interested in keeping his job, but he's honest and he likes to keep an open line of communication. And so Jack Broadbent will say to me privately, I'm surprised since I came up here from LA how much power the oil industry has up here. And then he says things like, I'm going to give you my cell phone. If you talk to me outside my office in the halls here on this floor, the executive floor, it gets back to Chevron within 10 minutes. And then there's all the whistleblowers who say things I'm not supposed to tell you. But
I know what I'm
it's like that.
Can I ask one more? Sorry. Are you all right?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. It's about the community. There's a lot of cultural diversity in the community, and I think, I don't know, this is totally speculation on my part. I get an impression, though, that a lot of people that live in the community simply don't want to make waves. They would rather just be really low-key. They don't want to participate in any kind of boots on the street, direct action. And I'm only assuming this. I don't know. I'm white. I'm coming from I guess I could say fairly privileged background. So what is the tone of the community, though, with how, is there an element of wanting to get organized to confront Chevron in a big way?
Well, it's not a simple answer, but one of the things that I was proud of was that the chair of the Chemical Safety Board said one of the reasons they came to Richmond was not just that it had tremendous public impact, 15,000 people in the hospital, but they felt it was a relatively sophisticated community when it came dealing with issues related to refineries because of our history of dealing with that and the history of the environmental justice movement in the community. That being said, because it is a low-income community, with all the social issues that go along with that, for example, in the Latino immigrant community, there's tremendous fear because Obama is a Nazi. This guy sent more people deported. They have, than any president in the history of the United States. Right. They have 400,000 people deportation quota each year. And so there's tremendous fear of doing anything that might put them at risk with the law, even traffic violations. So that presents
a lot of
certain
our
challenge.
communities' primary organizing is sort of at a family and neighborhood unit level to support each other, to be watching the streets, and when any of them get pulled over, to be there with the cops. And that's great, But you know, when you start piling on more and more things that you have to defend, people get tired and they get and you know, overwhelmed.
And most people, you know, frankly, you know, the Latino population is relatively young. The children are overwhelming the majority of the school district. Really, even Pinole Valley High is now 40% Latino. That, you know, education becomes a critical issue for parents. Certainly, you know, the atmosphere, the environment, all that's important too. Soccer leagues are tremendously huge. You know, a lot of people go to church, you know, so that's kind of their reality. So bringing in these kind of issues sometimes might be difficult, because then you start talking about dealing with power. Now, the African American community, it has its own set of challenges that have, you know, plagued the community there. Tremendous criminal justice involvement with especially low-income folks, not the middle-income and folks. But also, you know, the fact that there are many people like the folks on city council who are clearly in Chevron's pocket and are African American leaders. And so that creates divisions internally. So there's progressive African Americans like, you know, Henry Clark, who sees the world from a social justice perspective, and environmental justice is a piece of that. Folks like Doria Robinson, who are, you know, at the forefront of urban agriculture as a resilience strategy within the community. And yet,
Jovanka Beckles on the
Jovanka Beckles on the city council, who's clearly a black woman, but because she was born in Panama, you know, Nat Bates then says she's not really black because she's a Latina, you know, even though she's darker than him.
Yeah, so let me see if I can try to summarize this. Everybody in the movement, not just the Chemical Safety Board, the federal agency chair and staff, who they respond to the worst of the worst. So they're all over the country where there's real pain and disaster in communities like this. And like Andrés said, they're telling us, and in no uncertain terms, they're telling us that they have never seen a refinery community so sophisticated and so organized. But it's not just them. We're hearing this from throughout the movement. Now, you could say that's scary given the challenges we have, or you could say that, you know, it is what it is, or you could say, well, we're doing great. But what I perceive, you know, my perspective is a little different. Andrés came up in Richmond, and he's our Richmond organizer, so he's rooted there in his job too. I also work with other communities around the state and country on occasion, and so I have a little bit different perspective. And one of the things that really strikes me is something that we said back when we were bringing out 1,000 people a night a few years ago during the height of that fight over Chevron's dirty oil project. And these were Richmond residents, so it was obviously people were motivated. Same thing right after this incident. Really big community mobilizations when people saw they were pissed off, yeah, but also they saw an opportunity. They thought they might be able to win. So the apathy factor. But what I perceived then, and we actually would tell each other then, it's like the biggest challenge we face in winning this is believing we can. We actually said that to each other 5 years ago when the height of the fight, and now I still perceive this, that you know, Richmond city council meetings, you go to one, they're crazy. They're like they're totally insane
thing you've
and they're really abused by demagogues and stuff. But think about why. They have this totally open form of practicing democracy. It's almost like a call and response between the dais, where the elected officials are sitting in the audience. In fact, it is a call and response. And when it works well, everybody feels like they're really a part of making policy, because they really are. That's the culture of this community, one of the reasons I love it so much. But the people involved in it tend to focus on the way it is vulnerable to and abused by bad and embarrassing demagoguery. And I keep trying to remind them that you know, if they go to other city councils I know of in the Bay Area where you're sitting there and you feel like you're invisible and don't exist, by the end of the hearing you're not recognized at all, that you would like this better. It doesn't compute to them. They have never seen it. And so part of our challenge also is like, you know, in our hearts and our spirit, I think, as a community to understand that in some ways it's, whether we're doing better or worse than another community isn't the point. The point is, what can we do to do the best we can now together and to stay together? And there's a tremendous amount of pressure to demoralize us. I mean, Henry Clark talks with me about the bribery, for lack of a more exact word, that's going on in the community.
I think you should give a little background on Henry Clark, because they've heard that name a lot, but they may not know who that is.
He's kind of like, a bit like the Martin Luther King of the environmental justice movement in the East Bay. He's an African-American gentleman, late 50s. He came up in Richmond. He was one of the people kind of like the Freedom Riders, his generation. They went off to get education in one of the sort of revolutionary theological schools, and came back to his community because the whole point was to learn how to do better for his community, and he's worked there. He actually worked with CBE to found the West County Toxics Coalition. It was the first of the people of color environmental justice organizations founded in Richmond. And he's a close friend of mine. I've known him and worked with him for 30 years now. Is tremendously eloquent, a tremendous stature in the community, and also to some extent even with government agencies and people who otherwise completely disagree with him and don't share his values. Commands a lot of respect. And he, you know, he has friends, and a lot of us have, in the community, have family members too, who are taking some of Chevron's crumbs, some money, to keep quiet or even do the wrong thing. And that's really hard. Right?
Yeah,
and there's more of that. Chevron's been spending more and more money on that kind of astroturf organizing and divisive tactics as the community's challenges increased its power. So it's pretty crazy now.
Yeah, they created an organization called For Richmond, the number 4, and it has 4 sectors: education, employment, health, and public safety. So they got, as the chair, one of the school board members, a president of the Richmond Police Officers Association, you know, their usual, you know, crowd of cronies. And they're using it to be their new philanthropic arm to distribute the hush money throughout the community. And people are lining up to take the money because people are so desperate. And that's part of the challenge of the legacy of communities like this, where structural poverty is part of the system of domination. So that if people are structurally poor in the fence line communities, all the issues that go along with that make it a challenge for them to focus on where the real power is at.
Meanwhile, the refinery, you know, this is one pipe that burst on August 6th, Hiroshima Day, by the way.
Right.
There are thousands of miles it was one 5-foot pipe section. There are thousands of miles of pipe in the refinery, thousands of individual process units. Not all, but many or most also corroded. You know, the higher sulfur corrosive crude that is, and the gases, the corrosive gases that come from that hydrogen sulfide, which is also toxic, they get distributed throughout the refinery. We have enough data between the workers and CDE's research and a couple of government reports that we finally dislodged by Public Records Act requests and fighting between lawyers. We have enough information to be able to prove that the corrosion is widespread. We haven't identified every piece of it, but there are at least 2,000 points in the refinery that are at risk for failure and possible catastrophic, maybe even deadly incidents because of corrosion. This is a first-order urgent safety risk. It's a ticking time bomb. And under the current laws, there is no government agency that has the authority to force Chevron to deal with that quickly. The Chemical Safety Board made a whole bunch of recommendations 2 months ago. They made only one urgent recommendation, and that was to deal with this. They identified only one government agency, or only one level of government to oversee it, and that's the city of Richmond. And the reason for that is when all of the state, federal, and regional health and safety and environmental laws are broken, what do we fall back on in America? What's the most basic organizing principle of law that we have that we never even think about, we take for granted? It's land use. Local governments have land use authority. Richmond has the authority, and it's the only place where this authority exists. So we have the old guard staff, the civil service is still in place from the old days on Chevron's side, and the city council was unanimously directing their staff to follow this Chemical Safety Board recommendation. And the planning commission, that's supposed to oversee the staff and the building code and the land use policy. So the staff's just, thumbing their nose at the city council and saying, make us. And so we went to the planning commission, CBE and APEN. And on the 11th of July, the staff started canceling the hearing, so we couldn't get a hearing on our petition for them to take action. So we've now filed our notice that we're going to sue them for their Brown Act, their public process violations. We're forcing them to hold a hearing. The Planning Commission wants to, the commissioners themselves. So they voted to do it. So it looks like on July 11th, we're finally going to get a hearing. And the Planning Commission may very well hear all the evidence and then vote to declare the refinery a dangerous building condition, which then gives the city the direct power to force Chevron to tell us where all of the corrosion risks are and fix them. And hopefully in time before it blows up and somebody dies.
Losing the land use rights or
Yeah, I mean, this hasn't been done before. Land use policy has been used in San Francisco, actually by CBE in a case that I was into, to negotiate an agreement to shut down the Potrero power plant. That was when we wanted to shut it down because we had all the electricity we needed to replace it. So in San Francisco, it's sort of been used for this, but it's never been used in a situation where the goal wasn't to shut down the corporation's facility, but rather to clean it up. Not in this scale, so it's kind of new. I'm not sure.
Richmond, the refinery was actually built before the established conditional use permits, so it doesn't even have a CUP. It's operating without.
Yeah, so there's a. I won't be too technical because I didn't know much about land use before this and how it really works with industries. But so the bottom line is that in all of this other drama, in fact, there's a significant risk that the refinery could blow up and people might die tomorrow or next week or in a few months. And the only path without total revolution to address that without just trusting Chevron this time is for the city to use its power to do something that it has the power to do but no city has ever done with an oil company before. And that's all playing out right now. In some ways, it's easy for me to get lost in all of the different levels of the fight and the conflict. So I keep reminding myself that my main job is at this point is try to keep us alive, and so I'm keeping my eyes on trying to get this refinery to replace a few more of those corroded pipes, the ones that are going to go tomorrow.
And that's what they identified as the areas of corrosion are now these pipes are being held together with clamps to retain the structural integrity of these pipes. And there's 2,000 of them. So it's like, I make the analogy, it's like bicycle tire patches. And eventually you gotta get a new tube.
Yeah, and there's clamps on the clamp rust, they put them on.
Yeah, I had a question for Andrés, and since you've been a resident there all your life and raised kids there, I was wondering if you've what, if any, health related issues that you've had in your life? Like, are you asthmatic or?
No, but 3 of my siblings have had some form of cancer. My mother and 3 of my siblings have psoriasis. But I know people, you know, who's, like Greg was saying, whose kids are asthmatic or they're asthmatic. I mean, I went to Richmond High, the team mascot is the Oilers. At the side of the football field, we had a guy running around in an oil can. Yeah, so that's Richmond High. So it's something that's like, you know, everybody knows that it's a cancer belt, as well as the asthma, and these are all forms of autoimmune issues. So it's the body working against itself, because usually, I mean, some of it may be genetic predisposition, but when you see patterns of concentration, you can't help but make the corollary. And I remember back in the 1980s when I got out of college, started working with the city of Richmond, because this was already known, they decided to do a 10-year longitudinal study to identify what was really going on. And Kaiser was involved. And it was going to be a 3-phase study. After the first phase, one of the risk factors they identified was that there was a higher than average rate of smoking cigarettes, particularly in the African American community, which was the majority at that time. So they stopped the other 2/3 of the study, and Kaiser initiated a smoking cessation.
Yeah, the oil industry in places like this, but Richmond and the Contra Costa County refinery belt as well, they meddle with every attempt to do real long-term epidemiology, and it's easy to do. You know, you don't do it this year, you can stop it next year or 5 years from now. These studies take 30, 40 years to get conclusive results. And there's a history of that in Contra Costa County industrial belt. Meanwhile, the kinds of things that don't have such a long latency period, like asthma, childhood asthma, respiratory diseases, syndrome of skin rashes, eye, ears, nose, stroke symptoms, headaches, dizziness. It's a syndrome that's well established to be associated with exposures to the same kinds of pollutants that are elevated in repeated episodes from emissions from this refinery and from the port. We've done some peer-reviewed work with academics that also found, let's say this is the first time this was ever done, that the measurements and the chemical fingerprinting was done not just outdoors in the ambient air, but also indoors, where we spend 90% of our time breathing. And yeah, it gets in from outside. We fingerprinted it chemically to the refinery as well as to the port. And for some of the most serious threats, including fine particulate matter, the levels indoors were higher than outdoors in Richmond, and way higher than in Bolinas, which was one of our control sites. So, you know, we do that kind of science too, but you know, the fact is, in communities like this, everybody already knows that's making us sick. Look, what they tell me to do in terms of science is to focus on figuring out what to do to make it better. How do we, partially solarizing the refinery. There's old equipment in that refinery that hasn't been rebuilt. It's been refurbished a little bit, but it's 85 years old in some cases at the outside. There's boilers that are 85 years old. And, you know, rebuilding those with new faucets and nozzles on your burners it's a lot like rebuilding the engine in your Model T and saying, oh, I got a safe car now. So there's a lot of jobs in rebuilding those, and it'll make the refinery safer while we build the green energy to get rid of it. So those are, you know, there's a list of hundreds of items the community's been fighting for that are really specific that could make things better.
Well, yeah, we're coming up at 9 o'clock. So I'd like to thank everyone for being here. Maybe give you a chance to let us know about next actions that you're taking in Richmond that
Right, well, there's a number of things, like Greg was saying, we're really trying to mobilize folks for the July 11th Planning Commission meeting, because we really want to put, empower the Planning Commission to take this action that the building director and the fire marshal should have already done. And so this is basically, you know, our people in government taking action in lieu of Chevron's people not taking action. And then on August the 3rd, we're working with a whole range of folks for a major action, a march from Richmond BART station to the Chevron refinery, talking about Keystone XL and the relationship of dirty crude and Chevron and Richmond. And there will be civil disobedience during that day. And then on August the 6th, the anniversary, we're actually going to have a bell ringing ceremony at the Richmond Civic Center at the time the fire occurred at 6:25 p.m. And to commemorate that event, we're going to toll the bell 15 times for the 15,000 people that went to the hospital. And yeah, so
that's Hiroshima Day.
Yeah, Hiroshima Day, and that's what inspired us to do that, because that's what they do in Hiroshima. You know, the day, the time the bomb dropped, you know, everybody gathers and toll the bell. So those are the major actions. Of course,
Then in September, we don't have a date, but it's likely that the city council will be beginning its formal process of hearings to consider fixing its industrial safety ordinance to actually prevent this from happening next time. So it's possible that, you know, towards the other end of the range of, I think, your season, that there might be a really important action in Richmond again.
and on June 18th, the city council is going to consider suing Chevron. But the council is now fractured into 3 factions. And some people want a quick settlement. And there's a number of us who believe that a quick settlement is a sellout. That until you sue them, until you get a court date and you're walking into court, they're not really going to be willing to negotiate.
Go over how they, what their lawyers, their city attorneys are telling the council.
Or the planning commission,
And
yeah.
the planning commission.
Yeah, Greg was saying we've identified Brown Act violations. You guys know what the Brown Act is?
Public noticing? Public noticing?
Yes.
Well, that's part of it. It's it's California's open meeting law.
Essentially.
No,
So the Cadillac of Brown Act violations would be if you not only don't tell the public about your meeting, but then you go ahead and make your decision.
Right.
So they held a secret meeting.
Yeah, it means you have to have an agenda. It has to be noticed 72 hours in advance. It has to be in the public area. It has to be in the newspapers. You have to have open forum in the meeting to allow people to speak to issues not related to anything on the agenda. And you cannot make decisions on anything unless it is agendized. And this is where they fail.
Yeah, they held a semi-secret meeting. It was actually Andrés went to it, but it wasn't noticed, and there wasn't any opportunity for our lawyers or scientists to come. Yeah, they called it a retreat, where they considered and made a decision on our petition, on the that I was talking about on the cleanup, without our attorneys or lawyers or ability to make our case. Decided they would hear it, and this was not the commission's fault, really. It was the staff driving it.
The context is the commissioners wanted to hear it, but the city attorney in this retreat basically threatened them and said that if they took action contrary to his advice and held a hearing and made a decision that went against Chevron, Chevron might sue them, saying that they were prejudiced against Chevron when their application comes up for the hydrogen renewal project. And if Chevron sued them as a result of this decision, that the city would not have an obligation to defend them. And so that scared them. So it was a blatant intimidation by the city attorney.
And they would sue them personally.
Yeah, sue them personally, and the city wouldn't defend them. This
And
is,
they were talking a lot about how you know, I've got a family and I don't know if I want to take this responsibility on. They were saying that in open meetings.
Right.
Yeah. And then they were saying, but on the other hand, I really believe that we could die if we don't make the refinery clean up its act, and we know no one else is going to do it. So it's actually pretty powerful.
Yeah, the planning commission is majority on our side. So.
Yeah.
But I just want to thank you guys for
Tell us again the name of that bill that we should tell Leno
AB
to vote
26.
against.
AB 26.
26.
And Leno is important. He's on a couple of the key committees where the bill should die. Mark Leno.
And Leland Yee, he's the senator.
Yeah, the both of them. We should all write our senators.
AB
If
26.
you send Andres or me your contact information, we'll send your stuff on this.
We have
That
sample,
would be really
we have
good.
sample letters and information
Yes,
background.
please.
Also, if you want to talk to the steel workers, the refinery workers, I've talked to them about you guys being interested in this, and I think they'd be open to it. They may come out here, they might want you to go out to the union local in Martinez, but if you're interested in interviewing them for your, as part of your work on this, I'd recommend it. There's nothing quite like it. And they're good guys, I like them.
I just want to thank
These
you
are
guys
the
for
guys
doing-
who will be done in if the construction trade.
Yeah, they're
Right.
the ones that, they actually operate the refineries. They're from the same union that Karen Silkwood was from, you know, Karen?
Yeah, oil, chemical.
It used to be oil,
and
chemical,
Right.
atomic workers, now that's part of the US Steel Workers, United Steel Workers. But they're the same people. I've known a lot of them for a while. One of the leaders is on CVE's board of directors, another one used to be. Our organization and theirs hasn't always seen eye to eye, but on some of the key issues, refinery safety, and just today, we formalized an agreement, we have a consensus position with the refinery operators on what to do about refining dirtier oil. We talked about that earlier.
You're talking about tar sands, right?
Yeah, yeah. And basically, we have a joint position on it which kind of goes like, yeah, if you someday when pigs fly and you can figure out how to do it without blowing up the refinery and polluting more, then you can do it. And meanwhile, if you make incremental changes, if you want to go to a little bit different oil, and you replace a bunch of that old equipment so that there's no net impact, okay, we can live with that, but you ain't going to be refining tar sands. That's basically what it boils down to. And that's historic. That's the first time. With the Keystone Pipeline debate, that was part of the problem that made it hard to win.
Yes.
Here we have a jobs program, building this the solar alternative. Richmond actually has more per capita solar installation than any city in the Bay Area already, but to us that's peanuts. We're aiming much higher, and we have this real strong working relationship with the people who actually work in the oil industry here, where we're aligned. So, it'll be a tough fight, but we plan to win it because we feel like we have to here. That our climate's at stake, and more immediately, people's health and lives at the fence line. So anyway,
Thank you so much.
I have admired your truth and your brilliance and the way you really touch people's lives.